A sit-in or sit-down is a form of direct action that involves one or more people occupying an area for a protest, often to promote political, social, or economic change. The protesters gather conspicuously in a space or building, refusing to move unless their demands are met. The often clearly visible demonstrations are intended to spread awareness among the public or disrupt the goings-on of the protested organization. Sit-ins were a form of protest used to oppose segregation, and often provoked heckling and violence from those opposed to their message. The Fellowship of Reconciliation labor delegates had a brief, spontaneous lunch counter sit-in during their 1947 Columbus, Ohio convention. In one of the earliest use of sit-ins against racism, followers of Father Divine and the International Peace Mission movement joined with the Cafeteria Workers Union, Local 302, in September 1939 to protest racially unfair hiring practices at New York's Shack Sandwich Shops, Inc. According to the New York Times for September 23, 1939, on Thursday between 75 and 100 followers showed up at the restaurant at 41st Street and Lexington Avenue, where most of the strike activity has been concentrated, and groups went into the place, purchased 5-cent cups of coffee, and conducted what might be described as a kind of customer's nickel sit-down strike. Other patrons were unable to find seats. In May 1942, James Farmer, Jr., an organizer for the Fellowship of Reconciliation, led a group of 27 people to protest the racially discriminatory no-service policy of the Jack Spratt Diner on 47th Street in Chicago. Each seating area in the diner was taken by groups that included at least one black person. The peaceful patrons, several from the campus of the nearby University of Chicago, then tried to order. All were refused. The police were called, but when they arrived they told the management that no laws were being broken, so no arrests were made. The diner closed for the night, but thereafter, according to periodic checks made by core activists, it no longer enforced its discriminatory policy. With the encouragement of Melvin B. Tolson and Farmer, students from Wiley and Bishop colleges organized the first sit-in in Texas in the rotunda of the Harrison County Courthouse in Marshall. This sit-in directly challenged the oldest white citizens' party in Texas and would culminate in the reversal of Jim Crow laws in the state and the desegregation of postgraduate studies in Texas by the Sweat We Paint a Word Act. Sit-ins were an integral part of the nonviolent strategy of civil disobedience and mass protests that eventually led to passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which ended legally sanctioned racial segregation in the United States, and also passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that struck down many racially motivated barriers used to deny voting rights to non-whites. One of the earliest lunch counter sit-ins of the civil rights movement was started by a group of Morgan State College students and the Baltimore chapter of CORE. Their goal was to desegregate Reed's drugstores. The peaceful impromptu sit-in lasted less than ½ an hour and the students were not served. They left voluntarily and no one was arrested. After losing business from the sit-in and several local protests, 2 days later the Baltimore Afro-American newspaper ran a story featuring Arthur Natums, Sr., then president of Reed's, who was quoted saying, "We will serve all customers throughout our entire stores, including the fountains, and this becomes effective immediately." As a result, 37 Baltimore area lunch counters became desegregated. At another early sit-in, the Royal Seven, a group of 3 women and 4 men from Durham, North Carolina, sat in at the Royal Ice Cream Parlor on June 23, 1957, to protest practices of segregation. The activists were arrested and charged with trespassing. Their efforts are now recognized via historical markers in Durham. They went to court 3 times. Each case ended in their being found guilty. This sit-in for the purpose of integrating segregated establishments began on July 19, 1958, in Wichita, Kansas, at Dockham Drugs, a store in the old Rexall chain. In early August, the drugstore became integrated, then remainder of Dockham stores in all of Kansas. A few weeks later, on August 19, 1958, In Oklahoma City, a nationally recognized sit-in at the Katz drugstore lunch counter occurred. The Oklahoma City sit-in movement was led by NAACP Youth Council leader Clara Looper, a local high school teacher, and young local students, including Looper's 8-year-old daughter, who suggested the sit-in be held. The group quickly desegregated the Katz drugstore lunch counters. It took several more years, but she and the students, using the tactic, integrated all of Oklahoma City's eating establishments. Today, in downtown Wichita, Kansas, a statue depicting a waitress at a counter serving people honors this pioneering sit.